The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Provoke Media Podcast. My name is Arun Sudaman. I'm editor of Provoke Media based here in Hong Kong. Where else? Very happy to be joined today by two senior agency executives. We have Jane Morgan, who's the MD of Golin Hong Kong and head of client services for Golin Asia. We have Karolis Adomaitis, who's a vice president at Fleishman Hillard. Both of them, importantly, are key members of PRHK, which is the trade group for PR agencies in Hong Kong. And in particular, they lead the Next Generation Leaders Group, which has just conducted a survey of overtime at Hong Kong agencies. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and maybe also talk about some of the factors and the backdrop contributing to these issues in Hong Kong. And of course, we're all aware that Hong Kong is often hitting the headlines globally, not always for the right reasons. And maybe we'll get into some of those issues as they pertain to the experiences when it comes to the work-life balance at Hong Kong's PR agencies. So thank you both for joining. First question is pretty straightforward, I guess. Why undertake this research? Why does it matter? Because, I suppose some people would say it's hardly breaking news, right? That there's overtime going on at PR agencies.
Yeah. Well, let me take that one first and lead with how it came about. So this was actually the brainchild of a wonderful young public relations consultant called Iris Young, who used to be at Golin and is now in-house at Flash Coffee. And she was leading a breakout team to look at how we can, in Golin, how we can be more efficient. And we're always looking for ways to be better in that work-life balance because, we can always make improvements and unfortunately none of us are perfect in that area. And she actually came up with this idea of creating an industry initiative because she said one agency can put in great policies and great procedures and great thinking, but it's so almost systemic within the industry and also Hong Kong that unless we all come together, there won't be a collective change. And it was such an interesting thought because it's never been done before anywhere around the world, as far as we know. Where as agencies, we're always trying to be the best employer. We're always trying to get the accolades for ourselves. But the industry has never come together. So we found it such an interesting and different idea that I'm on the board of the PRHK. And so I took it to the board, Rachel from Fleischmann, Simeon from Ketchum, Anushka from Edelman, and a few of the others. And we discussed it. And Rachel particularly really wanted to explore the idea. And so the suggestion was that we go to the Next Generation Leader team and they look at it. And the reason being is because we're MDs and, some of the people on that board are CEOs, etc. We are on a different plane. So we can't sometimes know what's going on day to day. And it's really important that we kind of get feedback from teams. So that is kind of how it came about and how the creation happened and how the journey started. And then Karolis is one of our PRHK's Next Generation Leaders and along with Carol Young from Golin and Sarah from Edelman and Penn and a few others. So they really led this research, really digging into what the issues were. So that's a little bit about how it came about. Karolis, do you want to talk about why it's important?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I think as with any career or profession, work-life balance, at least to me, is sort of very crucial for the mental well-being of employees. And also it leads as well to the success of the organization. So I think from my perspective, the real question should be why this research hasn't been carried out more often and in more sectors, because it really provides with that sort of actionable points that agencies or companies or employees can really take on board and kind of help their employees to get better in various senses. So I think what is interesting is that the findings were consistent across agencies from what we have seen, whether the large agency or medium size, the local or international. We have really realized that there are some problems to address across the board. And we have also realized that PR industry in Hong Kong wants a better work-life balance, which has been overlooked for quite some time. And we wanted to understand the reasons behind it. So when we looked at it and when we saw the results, that really gives us some tools and some sort of ideas what needs to be addressed and how we can combat that. And at the same time, also us looking at what's happening across the world. I think we've seen just a few days ago that Belgium have started looking into piloting a 4-day week. I think UK has announced that before. So it brings up the question what we can do to achieve that better work-life balance. And I'm not saying necessarily that I'm in favor of reducing the work week, but I think what I'm saying is that I'm glad to see that work-life balance is being taken seriously more globally. And I think the organizations and governments are also looking at
Thank you both.
solutions.
Yeah, it's a very good context actually in terms of why it matters. And indeed, I think the point that it's unique, this kind of research. I haven't actually seen it anywhere else in the PR industry either globally. So perhaps hopefully we will see more of it, because as you both said, it can only help. So I wonder if you could perhaps just take us through some of the key findings here. What stood out to you, and were there any particular results that surprised either of you?
Sure, thank you. I think the research has definitely shown that overwork isn't good for employees or their companies. And I think in practice, it can be sometimes hard to overcome the unhealthy work habits and reach that sustainable work-life balance. But I think from our research, one of the biggest surprises was that more than 75% of respondents stated that overtime, both in PR industry and also in Hong Kong in general, was normal or expected. So when we saw that, we knew that there was a fundamental problem across the board. In terms of other findings, what we found that was interesting is like that 25% claim that they work overtime at least 3 times a week, with more than half of those doing so every single week. And over half of agency force work more than 10 hours a day consistently, which we found another shocking figure. So a lot going on there. Another interesting item was that unnecessary overtime is viewed as operational issue at agencies and has some lack of prioritization across the teams. And interestingly, with only 6% of respondents defining that client requests contribute to unnecessary overtime. So I think sometimes maybe people would say like, oh, it's always the client's fault, but actually the reality is a little bit different from what we've seen in this research. And also when it comes to agency staff talking about it, despite those very obvious causes of unnecessary overtime, and people say that they experience physical and mental health issues, but at the same time, majority of respondents have never spoken to the senior agency members to address the issue. So we immediately see a role for managers to play here in having those conversations on an ongoing basis, because sometimes just a simple check-in and asking someone, how are you, how is your day, what's happening even at home, like it's really important to someone. It can mean a lot. So that's something that we need to take as first small steps. And because as a result of all of this, I think these consequences are also taking a toll on mental health and physical health. So again, that's a big issue to tackle for us.
Yeah, I was just about to say, from my perspective, the really interesting things, the client statistic really surprised us, because we hear this all the time. And I've been in, I started out as an account executive, so I've lived it. I'm agency through and through. And, sometimes it's positive stress. And that can be when the client's pushing you. But I assumed that there was going to be a big statistic that was, client, over service or, these last minute requests. But the fact that it was only 6% attributing client requests is really surprising and also encouraging, I think, because that hopefully it's a shame we don't have year-on-year data to look at this, because maybe that signifies that the relationships between agencies and clients are strengthening and there's more partnership going on there, possibly. But I think what it does really highlight, 25% say they work overtime at least 3 times a week. So we have to look at that, and we don't have the answer right now as to how we tackle it. We just don't. But it's really important that we do address it. It should not be the norm. And I think the fact that 75% think it is normal, that suggests that we need to re-educate and set new behaviors and boundaries for the way that we are operating and that we all think. And shockingly, the 60% that have never talked about it is really worrying, because it means that we don't have visibility on what's really going on. And now we are, and again, Hong Kong has its own unique set of circumstances, but now we're back working from home. The worrying thing is we're not there to see people and if they're struggling. We're just relying on them telling us the truth. And sometimes people don't want to. So I think for agency leads, what's important is fostering an open conversation, an open environment where people feel like they can say what is happening, because this 70% experiencing physical or mental health is not okay.
Yeah, indeed, and no doubt there are other factors taking a toll as well. It's interesting when looking at some of these results, because the factors or the reasons for it, as you mentioned, only 6% define client requests as unnecessary overtime, which sadly robs us of the chance to blame clients. But there's kind of two things I wonder about in terms of factors, which is Hong Kong has always had this reputation of having a culture of presenteeism, where people have to be in the workplace, have to be in meetings, and there's not always a clear link between that and productivity, right? So it's almost like hours served versus work done. And then you also have the agency model, which some people would say does encourage, this idea of the work is there, it just has to be done. It's a 24/7 industry. The media doesn't ever stop. And so that sometimes contributes to this idea that agencies can't stop. How influential do you think both those factors are? And do you think there are any other factors that are contributing to this kind of situation of excessive overtime in Hong Kong?
A lot of it is about the work is there, because that's how we bill by our billing system for the industry is an interesting one, because, we charge clients by number of hours it takes to do things. And there's been many discussions previously about value pricing and alternative methods. But again, I think unless there's an industry shift towards that's quite a difficult thing. There is a lot of work to be done on an ongoing basis. But I again, with my MD hat on, I think it's about the operations of the organization. And the top 3 causes of working overtime, as the survey has told us, are tight deadlines and last-minute requests, insufficient manpower, and too many meetings. So insufficient manpower, we are all feeling right now, because this great resignation is real, and it doesn't show signs of slowing down as of yet. And there was a great piece of research last week, and I cannot remember who published it, but it was talking about people wanting purpose in their job. Now, this is not necessarily a new thing, but you can see the statistic of wanting purpose going up. So I almost think this is a moment in time for us to reframe as agencies what we are there for and what we're giving to our people and how we're helping them follow their dreams and find their pride. I am one of those sickening people who I genuinely love PR and I love my job and I thrive on it, but not everyone is like that. And so I think, you need to find what you love doing, and it might be going into a particular industry within PR, or it might be going into a particular section. You might be a great account person, or you might be just that, you love talking to media. I think we need to help people find their passion and what they truly love within the industry, because it is an amazing industry, and then put parameters around how they really shine within that. But we need to give them time to do it. So having insufficient manpower means they're always scrabbling around trying to do tasks. And, we all feel this. And the too many meetings was, something I just almost giggled at, because I think, oh my God, it's so right. I have too many meetings myself, but we do it, don't we? We're just kind of on this train. And so I'm so happy that this research has pinpointed these 3 areas, because it gives us something to really focus on fixing. Why do we have meeting after meeting? Why are they usually an hour? Why are there all these people there? Do we need all these people? Should it be smaller? Should it be quicker? I think there are so many possibilities to fix what we now know is and are the issues.
Sure. I suppose the insufficient manpower aspect was perhaps a little harder to address, especially currently, right? Because it's hard to import talent into Hong Kong. But certainly too many meetings and unrealistic deadlines. But that does suggest perhaps clients do have a role to play here. And I wonder whether either of you had specific thoughts on how clients can help in this, in this situation. Clearly, the research shows that they're not to blame, but ultimately they are a big part of this equation, and I wonder what role they do play when it comes to some of these working practices.
Yeah, so with clients, I think, again, the research shown that, it's not really, the overtime is not really coming directly from client relationships. However, I think number one item would be, or number one priority is the communication. I think if communication between a client and an agency is not clear, or the 2 parties are speaking, in different terms and different languages, this could lead to some sort of overtime issues, which would mean that maybe client briefs are not clear enough, or maybe some of the ideas are not being specific enough, and then the agency needs to spend extra time to really understand what is going on, and that could lead to some of the overtime issues. But I think secondly, that would be the overall expectations management, because clients need to work with agencies to find that mutual beneficial working relationship, where agencies are kept in the loop from the very beginning, when clients start sort of deliberating and putting ideas into process, so that the agency can start advising what's feasible and what's not, what's possible and what is not possible, and how they should be approaching that particular project from an agency perspective. So I think if that would happen, then the agency could perform better and be in line with the expectations of the client. And I think maybe lastly is being fair and also being reasonable, because I think we all understand that the PR industry is highly stressful. We deal with a number of crisis situations on a given day, and deadlines are very tight already. So I think being fair and reasonable is very important to gain that additional trust between the 2 parties. And I think if we address some of these items that I've just mentioned, I think the overall situation could become a lot better.
So better communication, clearer boundaries. Jane, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think we have found that clients are very supportive of change on the whole. Now, it does depend on how progressive the client, either the individual client is or the company itself. But, and looking across all the agencies who are part of this, we all have things in place that will either help protect time or recuperate after, busy periods. And on the whole, clients do seem to be supportive of it. So things like, having a Friday afternoon off every once a month at the end of that month. When we started doing that, we had emails from clients saying, we think this is a great idea. So I think, and it's because they want it too. Clients are also under pressure. Agency has its own set of issues and complications because we are servicing, but clients have a whole complex minefield to navigate as well, and particularly clients who represent multiple business units, who have multiple internal stakeholders. They're also being pulled in many different directions. So I actually think now is probably the right time to bring everyone together. And when we did this research, we were just looking at agency initially, but the thinking has always been, maybe later in the year or next year, we then look at clients and what issues that they can overcome in order to be more productive, in order to be happier, in order to create work that they're proud of. Because if we can do it on both sides of the house, then theoretically we will live in a very beautiful place.
Yes, sounds very positive. But actually, the next question is about something which I think, I suppose, is less so, and the consequence of overtime, which is the toll on mental and physical health. I think it's really important that this has been sort of drawn out from the research. So more than 70% of respondents say they've experienced negative physical or mental symptoms resulting from overtime, including anxiety, difficulty sleeping, inability to enjoy downtime, and exhaustion, amongst others, which is troubling. And of course, when we talk about the work-life balance, you can't separate it from all of these issues, right? The other thing that you can't separate it from is the sort of macro factors that are impacting Hong Kong. We've had, the social unrest from 2019, which I think will have impacted many people at agencies, right? That was one of the sort of key demographics that was quite involved in many of the events on the ground. And now we have a very unpredictable COVID situation, which I suspect is making people quite anxious. And, all of that contributes to, I suppose, a backdrop which can be quite difficult to navigate. How do you, I suppose, factor those issues into trying to create a positive working environment where you're not making too many demands on the people working at agencies?
So I think Hong Kong, and probably like anywhere else, we have a unique set of circumstances and challenges here, which we as agencies really need to deal with. But I think many of these challenges also exist in other parts of the world. As we've been talking, other countries have also those work-life balance issues. But I think our industry here really reached those crossroads in 2020 when COVID escalated at the start of that year, and really propelled working from home and hybrid working sort of models. But I think by now many agencies have shown the ability to operate remote or working in a hybrid model and serve their clients in that way. So I think everyone is very used to that. I think as agencies, we also need to ensure that our staff feels as part of the community, despite the challenges of working from home or sometimes not even seeing some of your colleagues. Even I had situations where I had to help onboard certain members of staff via online tools and not seen them, for a good few months until we were able to meet in person. So I think at the end of the day, we are as a creative industry, and we are also in people's business. So it's super important for us to get together for brainstorms and ideations and networking. And this is why any opportunity sometimes for any social networking is very important. So whenever we get back to some sort of normality, that could be encouraged and pushed forward, so that people can start interacting a little bit more. And I think as agencies, we also need to ensure that our staff is feeling looked after. So I think probably agencies, including us, we're taking that quite seriously. Even if we are working from home, we have regular catch-ups with teams and individuals to make sure that we know what's happening, what they're doing, do they have the right tools, do they have the right technology and the right support to get their work done, or we need some additional support. Because I think it's super important to keep that staff morale and mood at high levels when we are not in the office, because we not necessarily see what is happening with that particular person. So that community balance is super important as well.
I think we have had in Hong Kong, I think 3 years of situations that are unsettling, and with that emotionally draining and exhausting for everyone. Doesn't matter what demographic or psychographic you are, or whether you know consciously or it's unconscious that this is affecting you, but it is. And what we need to do as agencies is be empathetic to that and know that we can't operate or expect what we did before. But that does mean, how do we change? And again, I do not profess to have the answers. I'm excited to have, subsequent conversations and start to plan for the future. But it is obvious that this is a very key moment in time. And that's why people want more purpose, because they think, we've had 3 years of this. We want to live our lives. We want to do great work. We want to be proud. We want to be happy in our jobs, and also have time to have our life outside, that possibly sometimes we don't, because work is hectic. But I think the interesting thing or question will be, how do we support going forward, knowing that the uncertainty continues here in Hong Kong? So how do we support with this 70% of people who have professed to have mental or physical health issues, in part because of working, when they're not, we can't see them physically. So we can't look at those, those body triggers that we can if we're in person. And you look at the other statistic about flexibility, 90% want flexibility, of which I think most agencies are doing. One of the things that will be in our solution will be that the agencies commit to flexibility and really look at least 2 days working from home, if that's what the individual would like. But what comes with flexibility and working from home has its own set of challenges. So people tend to work longer because they've taken out the commute, and then you just kind of get on a train. We've seen people working through lunches, not going outside all day. So I think there's so many things that we need to tackle in a world where we can't physically see what's going on. And because in the usual agency environment, one of the reasons I love agencies, because I feed off other people's energy. And it just, when I've dropped the kids to school and I get to work, I need caffeine and to chat to a girl in it, because Christ, I've been up since, for 3 hours, 4 hours already. And it changes everything. It makes me ready for the day, because you have great conversations. You can feel everybody's passion. It's difficult to do over a laptop. And if we're going to be in and out, that's going to continue to be an issue that we need to address. And it's different in different parts of the world, where actually in parts of the world, people don't really want to go back to the office. What I see here in Hong Kong is we all do, because we love being together, which is so beautifully Hong Kong. But it does pose that issue that might not happen, or it might not happen on a continuous basis. This flexibility of working and hybrid working definitely is the future of work. We all know that, but I don't think we've cracked how we take care of our people in those circumstances.
Indeed. Really interesting point, actually. The what people are missing, I think, from not being in physical environments as much, especially in Hong Kong, I think, as you point out, where the sort of shared office culture is such a big part of people's lives, and they may not have that much space at home either. So 90% of respondents, as you said, have said that flexible working arrangements will help. But so that's one thing. But what are there any other potential solutions that have occurred to either of you from doing this research? Any advice for agencies, agency heads that are, see this research anywhere in the world, really, I suppose, and think actually this is an issue that we need to deal with at our agency?
Yeah, well, I can't give you any spoilers, really, Arun, because we're working on a playbook for all PRHK members at the moment. So the Next Generation Committee are brainstorming and bringing together all of the agencies to share best practices. And that for me is incredibly exciting because, again, and as an agency lead, I want to protect Golan and I want to make sure that Golan is the best. But it is now time for us to come together because this is beyond individual agencies. There's got to be a change. So this is the first time that we'll be bringing together, MDs, leadership teams to come up with solutions and share best in class. So that is all going to come together in the form of a playbook that we're hoping will be ready towards end of March, beginning of April. Although, and I would at this point love to give a shout out to Pen Lung from Creative Consulting Group, obviously Karolis, Jessa Ampro from Creative Consulting Group, Sarah Cheng from Edelman, and Carol Young from Golan, because these people are doing this in addition to their day job. So while we're talking about work-life balance, they're dedicating time. So we're hoping that it will be done by end of March, but it could be beginning of April. But it will be a playbook that will evolve, but is really aimed at giving suggestions and solutions to the issues that have been flagged through the research. And agencies are big and small, international, local. We're not suggesting that everybody adopts everything because it isn't possible. Holding companies have their own guidelines, so the point of this really is that you can take it, be inspired by it, and pick and choose what you want to do in each section. But if every single one of these agencies even does one or two things that we're suggesting, it will make an impact. But I think for me, it's about mindset. If the leaders in the organization are not serious and are not committed, it will not change. So it needs to come from the top. You need to be willing to make that change. It needs to trickle down into the teams, and we need to empower everybody within the organization to have their say, to continually feedback about what's working and what's not. And the thing I would say is we don't have the answers, and no one is professing to have the answers, and we might get things wrong. But if we don't try, we're not going to make a change. We have to continue to try to figure out and land on what are the best processes and things to do that will make that change.
And I think maybe just to add on top of that, in addition to the right mindset and also the various tools that we might be providing later on, it's all about education as well, because we are trying to be advocates here and use these points with our colleagues, with our clients, with our industry contacts, to help them really understand the importance of all of this and help them to take back some ideas back to their own organizations. As Jane was saying, sometimes clients are interested in what we are doing to address these things. So it's us being educators and really going around the industry and trying to share those best practices and best proof points to.
Well, I look forward to that. It sounds really interesting, the playbook that will emerge from this. And, good luck to you both. Good luck to PRHK with its work here. I think it is really important. But as you've kind of both mentioned it, education is one part of it. That intent to change is so important as well. And that's something I'm hopeful that agency heads perhaps who see this campaign, who see this research and, who see some of the advice that comes out of it, will take it more seriously if they're not already. So thank you both, and thank you for your time this morning. I hope you both have good weekends, and hopefully we won't get any more crazy COVID announcements over the next 3 days.
Of course we will. Hey, Arun, before we wrap up, I know you're supposed to be interviewing us, but every agency every heads of agency. I am wondering what you think about this topic, and have you ever seen any best-in-class management of people or inspiration of people or work-life balance initiatives? What's your perspective?
Certainly not. I haven't seen anything that really stands out before the pandemic, which is not to say there weren't. There must be agencies that do this stuff well, but not in a sort of, I suppose, what you call it, like a formalized manner in which they've kind of extended across all offices. If you're talking about a global network, for example, I think it's become more of an issue, obviously, with the pandemic. But I think it's still a work in progress, actually. I think, from when I started covering this industry, it's always been a big issue, this idea that agencies can quite easily turn into sweatshops. The attitudes have changed. I'm sure you're both aware of this. It's gone from being, well, that's just part of the deal, really. It's just part of the game in the PR agencies, to now I think people are aware it's a real risk, because employees are voting with their feet. And we're seeing that as a result of the pandemic, really. So I think people are taking it far more seriously. But like both of you, I would struggle to point to like a sort of an agency or a specific course of action that has worked like in an extensive manner. I think there's lots of agencies that are really strong in terms of culture, and giving employees a good experience. But managing the workload is always, I think, the hardest, sort of the toughest nut to crack. So I will be very interested to see how some of the lessons that you both come out with, and indeed, I think this will be something that more agencies will be taking more seriously around the world.
Yeah, well, we hope so. We certainly hope so, because it's so individual as well in terms of what people want. You have different age groups, you have different demographic. There are so many different factors that will lead to what an individual wants. I think the thing that we do want to stay away from is saying this is what you need to do, and then you'll have this perfect workforce, you'll have a great work-life balance. That's not feasible in any way. Our industry is up and down always. You've got a crisis or a product launch or a new business. It is that. So what we're trying to do is we're not saying we're going to fix over service and give everyone the perfect work-life balance, because if you come into PR, you're coming into the ride. But what we should be doing is giving people time to do brilliant work that they're proud of. And if there are those times where you've got to work long hours, then it's about the recuperation. So where we're looking at the solutions is the preparation. So where are your systems in place, like capacity planning, like how you do freelancer basis, all that stuff, all the preparation, the seeing ahead. But then when the inevitable happens, how are you then giving people that time to recuperate, and how are you making sure that it's not consistent? Because as we all know, that really does lead to burnout.
Exactly. And it's a couple of things that occurred to me from what you said then. We've kind of moved from this situation where, the conversation used to be, well, are people being maximized enough? Have they got any spare time in their timesheets that isn't being utilized properly?
Yeah.
And that really was the state of play, I think, like 10, 15 years ago. And I think that now clearly is changing to, okay, people are being utilized too much, and what's a healthy ceiling, and how can we properly manage capacity? I think those conversations are only just moving from like talk to action. The other thing I think is that, the pandemic has, it's making people reevaluate, obviously, how they work and what they do. But it's also, for businesses, they've had to work really hard to, in some cases, stand still and also to recover. So that's also contributed to this idea that actually it's really urgent. The work has to be done, and this is like really critical, and maybe the business won't survive. That sort of anxiety, right? Which I think kind of underpins a lot of the drop everything. We have to kind of get this done. And I think that you have both of those factors sort of create a certain amount of tension at the moment.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. And yeah, I will definitely be looking out for what comes out of the research. I'm sure many agencies will be. So thank you both and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Any agency that wants to be involved, please contact PRHK. We want people to be involved, please. And it's a great conversation to have at this time on a Friday because it's Friday. So happy Friday.
Indeed.
You've been listening to the Provoke podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.